Hi everyone, this is Mindy Eggen and I'm excited to be back on the My Favorite Things YouTube channel. Today we are creating a spooky Halloween background for these adorable little ghosts. These ghosts come from the Ghostly Greetings stamp set, so it has the 3 ghosts, some pumpkins, gravestones, lots of great sentiments. And my card, I'm just going to use a couple of the ghosts and then the 3 bats. I'm going to use a Misty stamping tool to stamp these images, and I'm using My Favorite Things black ink, and this is just some 80-pound white cardstock that I like to use that is Copic friendly. So now ghosts can be really tricky to color because they're technically translucent. So I'm going to color them in similar colors that I'm going to use on my background. My background is going to have a bright green in the middle, so to me that would reflect through the ghosts a little bit. And this particular ghost, I'm putting that shadow on the left-hand side because he's going to be facing towards the right. And I'm using G17 as my darkest color. Then I have YG06, YG00, and YG quadruple 0 and to blend that out a little bit. So I am leaving some white space in there, but I wanted to make sure that I still had a nice smooth blend between them so it didn't just stop the color. I wanted it to fade into the white a little bit. So now this guy, I'm putting that darker color on the right-hand side. I always kind of think about where the light is hitting first and where I'm going to place this on my card. So to me, it's going to be facing towards the middle. So that is why I want my darkest colors on that right-hand side. Once I have everything colored in, you can see that was really quick and simple to do. I'm going to line up the coordinating dies, hold them in place with some Post-it tape or some low-tack tape, and run them through my die cut machine and set them off on the side for later. Now I'm moving on to working on my ink blending. I'm starting with a piece of white cardstock that is 80 pound. You can use Bristol smooth cardstock if you're not comfortable with ink blending. Bristol smooth is super smooth, so the ink kind of sits on top of the paper almost, which is why I went with this 80-pound white cardstock. I wanted my ink to kind of sink into the cardstock a little bit. So I started with Twisted Citron. Then I went to Lucky Clover, going from the outside towards that bright color in the inside. And then I'm going to finish off those very outside edge with chipped sapphire. Now I did this background like 5 different times trying to get just the right blend that I had pictured in my head. I experimented with different cardstocks, different blending tools. You can use the sponges if you're more comfortable with those. I chose these blending brushes for the simple fact I just had an easier time showing all the colors. Since this is a portrait style type of card, I had to really be careful where I was placing my colors to make sure that they all showed in the background. And then I can come back and blend between all of those colors, just adding a little bit more ink, helping that transition. So it's really up to you and how comfortable you feel. But after experimenting 5 different times, this is what I had decided on that was comfortable for me as far as blending tools and cardstock. I'm going to take the Grassy Edges stencil to do some grassy edges at the bottom. I placed Post-it tape behind my cardstock so that'll hold my Grassy Edges stencil in place while I'm ink blending. And then I'm using black Soot Distress inks. All of these are the regular Distress ink lines. I wanted that bright, bold color that comes from the Distress inks versus the oxides, which have more of a chalky finish. So now this one I am using a blending tool so that I can kind of squish that down onto my paper. I need to kind of cover up any ink that's down there. So I made sure to kind of overlap my blended sky. Once I have that first layer on, I'm going to just shift this down a little bit and I'm going to add a darker layer. So that first layer I didn't apply as much. And on this second layer, which is going to be in the foremost front, I'm adding a darker layer. Now you're going to see when I remove this, I didn't quite line it up very well. And so there is a little bit of white showing through between the 2 different layers of the stencil, but I'm okay with that. I thought it kind of added a nice spooky touch to it. Now I want to emboss a sentiment on the front of this card before I do anything. And right now my card is very wet from the ink. So I am using a mini ink machine. I set it to the second setting, and it only takes about 2 minutes to warm up. Now see, this is what I'm showing. If I were to emboss right now, all of that embossing powder would stick to the background. So this is my life-saving trick that I have discovered somewhere out in YouTube world. So I placed my background in that sleeve, make sure it's completely clean, all that embossing powder was off, and I'm going to run this through this laminator twice. All it's doing is speeding up my drying process so that I can emboss a sentiment. So now see, this background is completely dry and my embossing powder is just sliding right off. Now to do my sentiment, I need to have an idea where everything is going to go. So I'm going to use a mini Misty tool, and I'm just lining up my images in there, and then I can place my sentiment where there's going to be enough room for it. And this is also off of the Ghostly Greetings stamp set. So once I have that lined up, I can close the door of the Misty to pick up that stamp set, and then I'm going to prep that background with an anti-static powder tool. Once I have that prepped, I'm going to ink up this sentiment in Versamark ink, stamp that down onto the cardstock, sprinkle on some white embossing powder, which is going to stand out amazingly on this background, and then heat set that with my heat tool. Now once that's cooled off for just a few seconds, I'm going to buffer over that with just a Swiffer cloth to kind of take away any of the excess powder that was left behind. I'm going to jazz up my background just a little bit, so I'm going to protect my bottom half of my card with that Grassy stencil. It doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to kind of cover the majority of it up. And I'm going to use 3 different kinds of Perfect Pearls powder. I'm taking a little eyedropper that I have of water and adding 3 little kind of pools of water on my mini glass media mat. And this first one I'm starting off with, I believe, is Zinnia. Apologize, I don't have them all written right in front of me as far as which one the green was, but there's Zinnia, Iris, and then Perfect Pearls, which is going to be the white. So I just scooped a little bit out of these jars, placed them in those pools of water that I have on the mat, and then just taking a paintbrush, mixing them together and flicking them onto my background. These take on a really cool iridescent look, which just I think really adds to that kind of spooky Halloween background. And I'll give you a close-up of it in just a minute. This white I decided to add just to kind of make everything pop a little bit more. So once I have those all flicked on, here's a close-up, and you can see there's just a really gorgeous iridescent shimmer, and it's just really fun with all those different colors. Now we're kind of in the home stretch of putting the card together, so I wanted to talk a little bit about my placement. So I have the 2 ghosts there that are going to be, towards the middle, but what I'm making sure is that there is an even margin on each side of those ghosts as far as how far they are from their edges. So I'm going to fiddle with that just a little bit, and then some of the bats I'm going to have kind of tuck under the ghosts a little bit. You can see the bats also kind of form a visual triangle, which is just really eye-catching and appealing to the eye, I should say, when it comes to looking at your card front. So when you see me fiddle here, that's just because I want to make sure my margins are pretty close to being the same for each ghost. Now the bats I'm just going to attach to the background with a tape runner, and for my ghosts I'm going to add some foam squares. Now these foam squares are very, very thin, and I wanted a little bit more dimension to them, so I'm adding 2 layers of foam squares to each of the ghosts, and then I'll peel off the backing from them, and I can add them straight to my card front, and that's just going to add a little bit of dimension to them. You don't have to if you want to keep your card flat. You can definitely do that. I just kind of love adding foam squares to my cards when I can. So now you can see how those ghosts are kind of reflecting that bright green in the background. So you can match your ghosts to whatever your background may be, whether it's blues or purples. Just add hints of those colors to your ghosts. And you can also use this for just a friendly greeting card. It doesn't have to be Halloween related. Even though it's Halloween images, you use a sentiment like "Hello, Bootiful," and it's just a really fun way to say hi to a friend. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed today's card, and I'll see you next time.